I was 22 years old when my father looked me in the eye and told me to get out. Not because I had done something wrong, not because I had hurt anyone, but because I told him I wanted to change my college major. That was it, that was the whole reason. I had been sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, dinner still warm on the plates, and I said the words I had been rehearsing for 6 months. I told my father, Gerald, and my mother, Donna, that I wanted to leave accounting and move into logistics. I told them I had been researching supply chain management, that I had been reading everything I could find, that I genuinely believed this was the direction I needed to go. My father put down his fork. He did not raise his voice right away. He just looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they are deciding whether to deal with now or throw away entirely. Before I go any further, if you are watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I would love to know. And if this story sounds like something you or someone you know has been through, please hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Because I promise you, this story does not end the way my father expected it to. Gerald said logistics was a meaningless field. He said he had paid $27,000 in tuition over 3 years for me to study accounting, and I did not have the right to walk away from that. He was not yelling. His voice was flat and certain, the way someone sounds when they have already made a decision and are simply announcing it. I explained myself as clearly as I could. I had done the research. Logistics and supply chain management were growing faster than almost any other field. I had a natural instinct for systems thinking, for seeing how moving parts connect. I was not running away from something. I was running towards something I actually understood. He let me finish, then he said, "If you change your major, you are on your own, no tuition, no rent, no food, you have 2 days to decide." My mother Donna sat across from me the entire time. She did not say a single word. I did not cry at that table. I did not beg. I said, "Okay, Dad," and I stood up and walked to my room. That night I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about every time Gerald had made a decision for me without asking what I wanted. When I was 16 and wanted to take a summer graphic design course, he said it was a waste of money. When I was 18 and applied to a school in California, he said it was too far and the conversation was over. When I was 20 and found an unpaid internship at a small logistics company and asked if I could take it for a semester, he said it was a waste of time. Every major choice I had made in my life up to that point had been filtered through Gerald first. This was not a new pattern. This was just the first time I had refused to accept the outcome. 2 days later, I had made my decision. I was not changing my mind. I packed everything I could fit into one duffel bag. I left my house key on the kitchen counter. When I walked out the front door, my mother was standing in the hallway. She watched me go. She did not say a word, not goodbye, not be careful, not I love you. That silence followed me all the way to the street. I called Mike from the driveway. Mike was my closest friend from high school, the kind of person who does not ask 20 questions when you call him at 9 in the evening and say you need a place to stay. He just said, "Come over, the couch is yours." His apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time. He slept in the bedroom. I slept on the couch with a spare blanket he pulled from the top shelf of his closet. I had 3 changes of clothes in my bag. I set an alarm every morning for 5:45 so I could shower before Mike needed the bathroom. My bank account had $1,200 in it. That was everything I had saved from part-time jobs during my first and second year of college. I had never needed to save aggressively before because Gerald had always covered the basics. Now the basics were entirely my problem. I went back to my university the following week and met with an advisor. I asked about transferring into supply chain management. The advisor told me the program had higher tuition than accounting, and without a financial sponsor, I would need to take out student loans or apply for scholarships. I submitted 2 scholarship applications. Both came back denied within 3 weeks. My grade point average from the previous 2 semesters was not competitive enough. I enrolled in 1 more accounting semester to protect the credits I had already earned and avoid losing everything I had put in. At the same time, I started applying for jobs, entry-level office work, data entry receptionist positions. Without a permanent address, without a car, without completed credentials, I got no responses. By week 8, my account was down to just over $300. I could not pay tuition for the next semester. I walked into the registrar's office and filed for a leave of absence to preserve my academic record. I signed the paperwork, picked up my copy, and walked to the bus stop. On the bus ride back to Mike's apartment, I did not let myself spiral. I looked at what I actually had. I had a couch to sleep on. I had a friend who had not once made me feel like a burden. I had $300 and no debt. And I had 6 months of self-directed study in logistics that I had been doing quietly on my own, because I wanted to and not because anyone told me to. I thought about Gerald saying logistics was meaningless. I thought about all the times he had closed a door before I could walk through it. The internship I never took, the school in California I never attended, the design course I never enrolled in. None of those were accidents, they were a pattern, and I had spent 22 years living inside that pattern without naming it. I named it on that bus ride. When I got back to the apartment, Mike was eating cereal at the kitchen counter. He slid a folded newspaper across to me without saying anything. He had circled 2 job listings in red pen, one at a diner, one at an office building. He said you might as well try, nothing to lose. I picked up the paper and looked at both listings. He was right, there was nothing to lose. I got both jobs in the same week. The first was at Patty's Diner, a small breakfast and lunch place about 1.5 miles from Mike's apartment. The owner was a woman named Connie, somewhere in her mid-60s, with short grey hair and a voice that could cut through a crowded room without effort. She interviewed me for about 8 minutes, asked if I could start Friday, and told me the job paid $12 an hour plus tips. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The second job was overnight security at a mid-size office building downtown. The shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. The pay was $15 an hour. The duties were straightforward: sit at the front desk, check credentials for anyone entering after hours, and walk the floors every 2 hours to confirm everything was secure. My weekly schedule looked like this. I worked the diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. on the 4 nights I had security shifts. I went from the diner to the apartment, slept for about 4 hours, then went to the office building at 10 p.m. and worked until 6 a.m. on those days. I was awake for nearly 20 hours straight. I did not complain about this to anyone, not to Mike, not to Connie, not to the security company supervisor. Complaining was not going to change the math, and the math was what I needed to manage. Connie noticed within the first week that I showed up on time, worked without being reminded, and did not disappear to my phone between tables. After 2 weeks, she gave me the weekend brunch shift, which was busier and paid better in tips. My income from the diner came out to roughly $700 a month after everything. The security job brought in around $900 a month. Combined, I was earning about $1,600 each month. After giving Mike $300 toward food and utilities, I kept $1,300. I put $1,000 into a savings account every single month and kept $300 for personal expenses. During the overnight security shifts, the building was quiet for most of the night. I used that time to study. I had found a free online course in supply chain fundamentals through a university extension program. I also downloaded open access textbooks on logistics operations, inventory management, and distribution systems. I bought a small notebook from a drugstore and wrote down everything I was learning, organized by topic. Within 3 months, that notebook was full. I bought a second one. One night during a shift, it was raining hard and I had ridden my bicycle to work because my bus pass had expired, and I was waiting until the first of the month to renew it. I arrived completely soaked. There was no locker room or changing area accessible to me at that hour. I sat at the front desk for 8 hours in wet clothes, did my rounds, checked my logs, and went home when the morning staff arrived. I did not call in sick, I did not ask for accommodation, I just did the shift. What changed during those months was not external. I still had no degree, no car, no formal experience in the field I wanted to work in, but something had shifted in how I understood myself. At the diner, I learned to read a room fast, manage competing demands, and stay calm when things backed up. At the security desk, I learned to observe systems, track patterns, and document accurately. I was not just working to survive. Without planning it, I was training. By the end of month 6, I had saved $7,800. I had filled 2 notebooks front to back with logistics theory and systems analysis, and I was about to meet the person who would change everything. It was a Thursday morning at Patty's Diner, and I was on my second hour of the breakfast shift when Trevor walked in. He was a regular. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordered the same thing, always sat at the same corner table, always had his laptop open before his coffee arrived. I had served him dozens of times. We had exchanged maybe 30 words total across all of those visits. That Thursday he got up to leave and walked out without his phone. I saw it sitting face up on the table. I grabbed it and pushed through the front door before he reached his car. When I handed it back, the screen was still lit, and without meaning to, I saw what was open on the display. It was an inventory management dashboard, and I recognized the software immediately from my self-study. I also saw in less than 2 seconds that one of the data columns had a formatting error that would throw off the fulfillment rate calculations. I should have just handed him the phone and walked back inside. Instead, I said, "You might want to check the fulfillment rate column in row 17. The unit formatting looks off." He stopped walking and looked at me. He asked me how I knew that software. I told him I had been teaching myself logistics and supply chain management for the past several months. He asked why I was working at a diner. I gave him the short version. I told him I had left school when my funding fell through, that I had been working 2 jobs and studying on my own, and that I was working toward getting back into the field. I did not say anything dramatic about my parents. I did not ask him for anything. I just answered his questions directly. Trevor told me he was a co-founder of a startup called ClearPath Solutions. They handled logistics coordination for mid-size companies across Arizona and were expanding quickly. He said they had been looking for someone who could think systemically and learn fast, and that a formal degree was less important to him than demonstrated capability. He handed me a business card and told me to send him an email that week if I was interested in interviewing. That night I sat at the security desk with his card in my hand for a while before I did anything. I considered the possibility that it was polite conversation and nothing more. I also knew that doing nothing guaranteed the outcome I already had. At 11 p.m. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. I kept it short and specific. I introduced myself, summarized what I had been studying and why, and attached a 2-page document listing every logistics concept, software platform, and operational process I had taught myself over the previous 6 months. I sent it at 11:23 p.m. and went back to my rounds. 3 days later, Trevor replied and scheduled an interview for the following Tuesday. The interview lasted 90 minutes. There were 3 people in the room: Trevor, his operations director, and a logistics coordinator who had been with the company since its founding. They asked me technical questions about route optimization, inventory turnover, demand forecasting, and supplier lead time management. I answered every question. Not perfectly, but accurately, and when I was uncertain, I said so and explained how I would find the answer. At the end of the interview, Trevor asked me one more question. He asked me what I would do in the first 30 days if I got the job. I told him exactly what I would do. Spend the first 2 weeks learning their current systems without changing anything, document every process I observed, identify the 3 highest friction points in their operations, and come back at the end of week 4 with specific, data-supported recommendations. He hired me as an operations coordinator at $38,000 a year. I went home to Mike's apartment and told him. He stood up from the couch and hugged me and said he always knew I would figure it out. I had been sleeping on his couch for just over 7 months at that point. I gave him 2 weeks of notice on the couch and started looking for a room to rent. I started at ClearPath Solutions on a Monday in March, and I treated every single day there like a class I was paying for myself. I arrived 30 minutes before anyone else in the office. I stayed until the work was done, not until the clock gave me permission to leave. I took notes on everything. I asked questions that were specific, not general. I did not pretend to understand something I did not understand, and I did not wait to be told what needed to be done when the answer was visible in front of me. 3 months in, I noticed a consistent delay in how incoming orders were being sorted before they entered the fulfillment queue. The sorting process was manual, based on a system that had been set up during the company's first year and had never been updated as volume grew. I spent 2 weekends building a revised process on paper, ran the numbers against the previous 6 months of order data, and presented it to Trevor in a 15-minute meeting. He tested it. Within 3 weeks, the new process had cut order processing time by 17%. At the 6-month mark, I was promoted to operations manager. My salary went to $52,000 a year. I found a one-bedroom apartment and moved out of the shared room I had been renting since leaving Mike's cooch. I also re-enrolled in school. The university I had left 2 years earlier accepted my leave of absence and allowed me to return. I switched into supply chain management, exactly as I had originally wanted, and ClearPath covered a portion of the tuition as part of my compensation package. I took classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and every Saturday morning. The next 2 years moved fast. I completed my degree. I was promoted again, this time to Director of Logistics, with a salary of $85,000 a year. I was 27 years old and running the operational systems for a company that had grown to serve clients across 4 states. My relationship with Gerald and Donna during this period was minimal. Donna called once about 2 years after I had left. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She said, "Your father asks about you sometimes." I said, "That is good to hear." We said goodbye. That was the extent of it. I was not angry anymore. I had stopped being angry somewhere around the 18-month mark. What replaced the anger was simply distance, not hostility. Just the absence of need. After 4 years at ClearPath, I made a decision. I had learned everything the job had to offer. I had watched the company grow and understood every layer of how it operated. I had also spent 4 years studying a gap in the market, small and mid-size businesses in Arizona with complex logistics needs and no dedicated support. ClearPath served large clients. Nobody was serving the smaller ones well. I used $40,000 from my savings to register a new company, Ridgeline Logistics. I gave Trevor 6 weeks' notice. He did not try to talk me out of it. On my last day, he handed me a signed contract. Ridgeline's first client was ClearPath Solutions. The first year was hard. I had 3 clients, 2 part-time employees I paid before I paid myself, and months where the numbers were close enough to uncomfortable that I checked them twice a day. But I did not lose a single client. I did not miss a single deadline. Year 2, I had 8 clients. Year 3, 21 clients and annual revenue passed $1 million for the first time. I was 31 years old. I bought a house in Scottsdale. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. The first thing I bought to put in it was a small cactus for the windowsill above the kitchen sink. I picked it because it required nothing from me and it would survive regardless. And then one afternoon in late fall, my real estate broker called me about a property that had just come on the market. He said the sellers were looking for a quick close, motivated to move fast, and the property was priced well. He sent me the address. I looked at it for a long moment. It was my parents' house. Gerald and Donna were selling the home they had lived in for over 20 years. My broker told me they were planning to become renters. He did not know the connection. He was just passing along a listing. I did not call him back right away. I sat with that information for 3 days. I thought about what I wanted to do and more specifically why I wanted to do it. I was not going to do anything that was dishonest or illegal. If I acted, I was going to act with complete transparency in the transaction itself and complete intentionality in what came next. On the 4th day, I called my attorney and told her I wanted to set up a limited liability company for a real estate acquisition. The limited liability company was registered under the name Ridgeline Property Holdings. It was a separate entity from my logistics business, properly structured, legally clean. My attorney handled the paperwork. My broker made the offer on the property through the new company. The offer was fair, close to market value, no lowball tactics. Gerald and Donna accepted within 48 hours. They needed the liquidity. The deal closed in 22 days. Throughout the entire transaction, Gerald and Donna had no reason to look past the company name. They were communicating with my broker and their own real estate agent. There was no reason for my name to appear anywhere in the process. Once the sale closed, Ridgeline Property Holdings contracted with a third-party property management company to handle the administrative side. The property management company sent Gerald and Donna the new lease agreement. The previous rent had been $1,200 a month, a rate that had not changed in several years and was significantly below the current market value for that area. The new lease reflected actual market rate for a property of that size in that neighborhood in Arizona at that point in time. The new monthly rent was $3,600. I found out about their reaction through the property management company. Gerald called their office and disputed the increase. He was told the adjustment was within legal parameters and reflected a new ownership structure. Donna began searching online. She found references to Ridgeline in connection with my logistics company. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Her voice when I answered was quiet and careful. She asked me directly, "Did you buy this house?" I said yes. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said she needed to talk to me in person. I drove over on a Saturday morning. I parked on the street in front of the house I now owned. I walked up to the front door of the home I had walked out of 10 years earlier with a duffel bag and $1,200. I knocked. Donna opened the door and stepped back to let me in. Gerald was already at the kitchen table. He was sitting in the same chair he had been sitting in the night he gave me 2 days to decide. He looked older. His face was tight and his jaw was set, and he was watching me the way he always had, like he was preparing for a negotiation. I sat down across from him, not beside him, across. He started. He said I had no right to do this. He said this was manipulation, that what I had done was underhanded, that a person does not do this to their own family. I let him finish. Then I opened my bag and took out a folder. Inside were 3 documents, a copy of the purchase agreement, the registration for Ridgeline Property Holdings, and a summary of the transaction timeline. I placed them on the table and pushed them toward him. I told him to have an attorney review every page. Nothing in that folder was anything other than a legal, arm's-length real estate transaction. He had listed the property. A buyer had purchased it. That buyer happened to be me. Gerald pushed the folder aside without looking at it. He said he would take legal action. I told him he was welcome to do that, and that he would spend money on an attorney to confirm what I had already told him. Then Donna started to cry. She said she could not understand how I could do this to them. She said after everything they had given me. I looked at my mother and I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something and I need you to actually hear it. The night Dad told me to leave, when I was 22 years old and I walked out of this house with 1 bag, what did you do?" She did not answer. I said, "You sat there. You watched me go and you did not say a single word. I am not saying you had to fight my battles for me, but you were my mother and you had nothing to say, not 1 word. That stayed with me longer than anything Dad ever said." Donna looked down at her hands. I turned to Gerald. I said, "You told me that logistics was a meaningless field. I want you to know that the company I built in that field bought the house you spent your whole life paying for. I did not do this because I want to hurt you. I did this because I have spent 10 years trying to prove something that should never have needed proving, and I think you deserve to understand exactly where that work went." Gerald's expression did not change, but he stopped talking. He sat there for a moment and then he said, "So what do you want? Do you want me to apologize?" I said, "No, Dad, I do not need an apology from you anymore. What I need is for you to pay rent on time." He looked at me for a long time. Then I said something I had thought about carefully before I walked through that door. I told him I was not there to remove them from their home. I told him I had no intention of doing that. The $3,600 per month was the legal market rate, and I had every right to charge it. But I was willing to sit down with them and discuss a reduced rate, an arrangement that was fair to everyone under 1 condition. The condition was this: they had to sit across from me at that table, hear what I had to say without interrupting, and acknowledge out loud that the decision I made at 22 years old was the right decision for my life. Not that they agreed with it, not that they approved of it, just that it was mine to make, that it had been mine all along. Gerald said nothing for almost a full minute. Donna wiped her face and looked at him. I stood up, put my copy of the documents back in my bag, and I told them they had 1 week to think about it. I left my number on the table and I walked out. Gerald called me 4 days later. He did not apologize with those words. What he said was, "We can sit down and talk." I said I would be there Saturday. That conversation at the kitchen table lasted almost 2 hours. For the first time in my life, Gerald listened without redirecting, without dismissing, without turning my words into an argument about his authority. I do not know what changed in him or when, but he sat there and he listened. Donna spoke more than he did. She told me she had thought about that night many times over the years. She said she had not known how to go against Gerald when he had already made a decision. She said she was sorry, not a big dramatic apology, just the words said plainly while she looked at me. I told her I heard her. At the end of that meeting, I told them the rent would be $1,800 a month, below market because the circumstances were not purely transactional. That was my decision to make as the owner of the property. They accepted. 6 months after that conversation, I was sitting in my office at Ridgeline Logistics on a Tuesday morning when my assistant knocked on the door and told me we had just received a signed contract from our largest client to date, a regional distribution company out of Phoenix with operations across 3 states. The contract value was significant enough that I sat with it for a moment before I responded. After the meeting, I drove home to Scottsdale. I walked into my kitchen and looked at the cactus on the windowsill. It had grown several inches since I first brought it home. It had not needed anything from me to do that. I had barely paid attention to it. It had just grown steadily on its own terms. Gerald and Donna paid their rent on the first of every month. We did not talk often, but when we did, it was different from how it had been. Quieter, more honest. Gerald had retired from his job the year before and was spending time on projects around the yard. Donna had started volunteering at a community center on weekday mornings. Their life was smaller than it had been, but it seemed to suit them. I did not carry any bitterness about the years that had passed. What I carried instead was a clear memory of who I had been at 22, sitting on that bus with $300 and a leave of absence form, deciding to name the pattern I had been living inside. That was the moment everything actually started. The truth is this: when someone closes a door on you, especially someone who was supposed to be in your corner, it feels like a punishment. For a long time I thought Gerald had taken something from me, but what he had actually done was remove every reason I had to wait for permission. Once there was no safety net, there was also nothing holding me back. I built everything I have because I had no other option, and I would not trade that for anything. Your path is yours. Other people do not get to determine whether it is valid. Not your parents, not your boss, not anyone who has decided they know better than you what your life should look like. The moment you stop waiting for their approval is the moment you start making real progress. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been told that the path you wanted to take was not worth it, and what did you do about it? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Hit the like button if you made it to the end, and subscribe so you are here for the next one. There are more stories coming, and some of them are even harder to believe than this one. Thank you for spending your time here. I mean that. Whatever you are working toward right now, keep going.